I'm tiny. Hello. And you could probably just make... Oh, excuse me a second. I was actually looking for... There we go. I need to write down something before I forget, because had to work it out. Because I'm crap at maths, you see. So that's... Alright, 18. Come on. I can never get a pen that works. There you go. Right. So, as you know, I said in my stance going forward, that I was going to deal with drama about trans issues, stuff like that. But despite the title of this video and the title of this article, this is actually more to do with feminism and the unfair treatment towards women. In terms of sports, which is the real culprit of women in sports. You know what I mean? It has nothing to do with trans, to do with how women are treated at sports. Pardon me. I've just had a nice kebab, so kebab and chips out, quite nice. But it's all interconnected, and I wanted to cover it because also it has some very good points in there. Again, there's a few, So this is, I felt it needed covering because it's important, you know what I mean? So yeah, so interesting enough, this is not about trans, this is about women and how they are treated within the sports industry. So let's take a look. Do I really need that? I usually work because it's like, you know, my bedroom's kind of makeshift studio, but I don't really need these on, do I? I'm wasting battery, aren't I? Yes, wasting battery, darlings. Okay, right, so the real threat to women's sports is not trans women. There's a point here which I illustrate, which is quite funny because it's kind of like it illustrates something again with like I did with the trans toilets as well. Right. On author's note, on the 2nd of August 2021, weightlifter Laurel Hubbard of New Zealand became the first transgender woman to compete at the Olympic Games. She failed to record a clean lift. Failed. Not succeed, but failed. Which is funny because apparently she's supposed to have a biological advantage. Again, clearly people don't know how HRT works. Right, originally published May 13th. Transgender women have been eligible to compete at the Olympics since 2004 Athens Games, but at this summer Tokyo Games, New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard could become the first, according to International Olympic Committee guidelines. Now, first off, straight off the bat, it says eligible, but here's the irony. Again, with transgender people... Oh, pocket, air pocket. Right. Transgender people have been using the toilets for years, decades. No drama, no hassle. No one mentioned it. No one piped up. Again, this nonsensical bullshit issue, problem that was stirred up, that never existed, right? Just bear this in mind, right? This date here, 2004. If I'm not mistaken, from today to this year today, that's 18 years. 18 years. 18 years. That's 17 since this article. Yeah, so yeah, 18 years, and it's only recently people began to bitch about it. They've been competing for years with no drama, no hassle, and they're bitching about it now. Why are they bitching about it now? Because they want to cause drama, stress, divide, and it's just they want to find a problem. They want to find something they can latch onto to cause issues. That's what it's about. But anyway, that's my first point, and that's it out of the way. That's the only trans thing I want to get across there. That's why I wrote that number down, because it's like 18 years, folks. Just like they've been using toilets for decades and no hassle, no issue. 18 flipping years. That's quite a lot of years. No one batted an eyelid. Now people go... Row, 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 row. Although, despite the fact that evidence proves that's bullshit. And 2... Trans women have actually lost to trans men, which is funny because according to the logic, as if you've watched my other video, according to the logic is, if you're born biologically this or that, if you're born biologically male, no matter how much HRT you're on, you'll still have a biological advantage, apparently. It's funny though, because a trans man beat a trans woman, and that trans man was biologically born a woman. Bullshit. People were quite embarrassed, actually. They felt a bit stupid, because it's like that example. I mean, it's not just that example. There's many examples, and there's people who have actually done tests on themselves where they've gone actually and looked at their performance ratings. Their performance went down dramatically. So as soon as so if anything, you're shooting yourself in the foot. But it's not about competition. It's about being yourself in that competition. If it was that important to them to win, they wouldn't. If the Olympics is more important to them, then surely they wouldn't have transitioned. They'd be like, I would love to transition, but I don't want to lose my gold medals. That's not what was important to them. Important for them was to win a gold medal as the gender they identify as. Well, as soon as they went on HRT, all the perks they had, all that man strength, if you'd like to call it that, disappears. Anyway, according to International Olympic Committee guidelines, last updated in 2015, transgender women are more eligible to compete in their total testosterone level in serum has been below 10 nanomoles per litre for at least 12 months. Weightlifting's International Federation follows these guidelines, and Hubbard, who transitioned nearly 10 years ago, is playing by the rules. Soccer player Quinn is the first out trans Olympian. Yeah, soccer player Quinn is the first out trans Olympian. That's what I mean. It's quite funny because ever since they've kicked up about it, a lot of people who have been racing for the men's, all kinds of things, have come out and gone, well, that's funny, folks. I'm trans. And you didn't fucking realise. Screw French. But the news of Hubbard's likely Olympic qualifications still sparked debate. Some media outlets promoted narratives about unfairness. Again, it's all media bullshit. While an Australian-based group that claims to advocate for women's sports issued a statement against Hubbard competing in Tokyo, saying that including transgender women removes the basis of equality between men and women. So, oh yeah, like it says here, hold up, firstly, trans women and women. Okay, right, so all of this, right, because this, like I said, this article is more about feminism, and it does get to the point where it actually tells you about, it's actually just nothing to do with trans people. It's actually because in sport in general, women are treated unfairly. But again, there's always a constant theme. The reality of it all has nothing to do with them having a so-called advantage, because they don't. They lose that advantage as soon as they go on HRT. It all comes down to stigma. It all comes down to bigotry and stigma. Right, so hold up. Firstly, trans women are women. Furthermore, arguing that trans women are a threat to fairness or equality in women's sports isn't just transphobic. The argument is built upon a fallacy because women's sports aren't fair. If women's sports were fair, all athletes would have equal access to competitive opportunities, and yet there was no widespread outrage 5 years ago at the 2016 Rio Games when the Olympic weightlifting program included 156 quota spots for men compared to 104 for women. That's quite a lot of spots, isn't it? This summer's Tokyo Olympics will actually mark the first time that weightlifting, a sport that has been included on every Olympic program over the last century, will welcome an equal number of men and women. In fact, the Tokyo Olympics are expected to be the most gender-balanced games in history, with women slated to make up 49% of all participants. But an opportunity gap persists in other sports. 16 men's soccer teams will travel to Japan this summer compared to 12 on the women's side. Cycling has spots for 300 men but only 228 for women. And boxing, the most recent summer sport to include women, remains most skewed. 206 men will travel to Tokyo compared to only 80 women. Brackets, likewise, Men likewise are excluded from 2 summer sports: artistic swimming and rhythmic gymnastics. How will the IOC's framework impact transgender athletes? Outside of the Olympics, the playing field is far less level. According to the data compiled by Women's Sports Foundation, 87% of the NCAA institutions are currently in compliance with Title IX. Oh my God, Roman numerals. So I do know what it is, but I forgot it's gone. That means nearly 9 out of 10 US colleges are currently offering male students more access to sports than female students. At the professional level, the gender opportunity gap is even wider. For the top basketball players in the world, there are 450 roster spots in the NBA compared to only 144 in the WNBA. It's funny, my nose is not blocked. It's actually the cavity right up here somewhere. It's annoying. And there's nothing up there. Mind you, I have a kinked nose, don't I? But anyway. In cycling, the best men compete in the grueling 21-stage Tour de France, while the current women's equivalent is a single-stage token gesture race called La Course. British cyclist Lizzie Dinnigan won La Course in 2020 and used her victory to advocate for a full women's Tour de France. And if women's sports and sports in general were fair, that would mean doping isn't a concern. Yeah, at 2012 London Olympics, 21 medals were awarded in women's weightlifting. Do you know how many of those medals were later stripped due to doping violations? 11. Out of 21, 52%. There will be no apology for all the caps because that is outrageous. On the men's side, 7 out of 24 medals were later stripped, so also not great. If you want to be upset about an athlete being denied their Olympic moment, you'd be much better off directing your energy at an actual threat to fair competition. Dopers! Again, it all comes back down to dopers. You know what I mean? So it's like, as you can see the picture, basically, the picture is also, as well, it comes down to this. The whole sports industry is messed up. And they're just finding things to latch onto and lash out on. Lash out at. And if women's sports were fair, that would mean women were paid equally. Yet if a professional women's hockey player, if you're a professional women's hockey player, it will take you hundreds of years, yes, hundreds, to make what an average NHL player makes in a single season. In basketball, Stephen Curry is the highest paid NBA player, will make the equivalent of 350 plus WNBA salaries this year alone. Even tennis, the sport so often lauded for its commitment to equal pay, has a gender pay gap outside of the 4 Grand Slams. In 2020, the top 200 men on the ATP Tour averaged $568,257 in prize money, nearly twice the average of the top 200 women on the WTA Tour, which is $388,739. And if women's sports were fair, that would mean women's sports are invested in equitably. Yet, as was evident in the NCAA women's division, one basketball tournament earlier this year, women's sports are often treated like a burden rather than an opportunity for growth. In addition to providing men's players with better weight training facilities, the NCAA also provided them with a more robust digital media hub and marketing opportunities, 2 key tools to increase viewership and revenue. Also from On Earth, top competitor of Leah Thomas defends transgender swimmers' rights to compete. These aren't accidents. These are decisions from the omission of the word men's. From the men's Final Four logo to withholding March Madness branding from the women's tournament, the NCAA has continually perpetuated the idea that men's basketball is the norm and treated as such. The takeaway? Don't blame the women's game for not making money when the real culprit is decades of underinvestment fueled by sexist beliefs. And if women's sports were fair, that would mean women have equal access to coaching and administrative opportunities. Yet since the USA enacted Title IX in 1972, the number of female head coaches of women's collegiate sports teams have declined significantly from 90% in 1971 to 43% in 2019. More often than not, the person making those hiring decisions is also a man. Across all three NCAA divisions, nearly 8% of collegiate athletic directors are men, and of those, over 85% are white. The disproportional hiring of men is also true in the Olympic sports. At the 2018 Pyeongchang if I pronounced that right, well done, but if not, I butchered it. Olympics, only 8 of 66 coaches for the US team were women, 7 of whom worked in figure skating. Even the best professional women's teams aren't coached by women. Only 1 of the 10 current NWSL teams is coached by a woman. 5 of the 12 WNBA teams, 3 of the 6 NWHL teams, and of those 9 women, almost all are cisgender white women. Women are also underrepresented in the operations and administrative positions that govern sports and leagues. Of the 31 international federations and overseas summer and Olympic sports, 0 have executive boards with equal gender representation, according to 2018 data from the Association of Summer Olympics International Federations. Alrighty then. In fact, only 1 of the 31 federations have a board of at least 40% women, while 18 of 31 had less than 25% representation of women. And if women's sports were fair, sexual harassment and abuse would not be an issue. Yet athletics like Greek sailing champion Sofia Bekatoro feared that speaking up could jeopardize an Olympic dream. An institution like Louisiana State University failed to adequately investigate sexual misconduct complaints, and of course Larry Nassar was able to abuse hundreds of gymnastics enabled for decades by those around him. Again, there's also, I can't remember if it's this article or another article I read, where it's like, the funny thing is you put restrictions on and they have to check that you're trans or some sort of stupid thing like that. You're giving, not all of them are perverts, but if you've got a coach who's a pervert and he's getting away with abusing the people there, he's got more of an excuse to touch you. I need to physically check to see if you're this. It's disgusting. That's the thing. See, putting restrictions to stop rather than just having restrictions to be fair, it does a double, either directions. I mean, it's nice about toilets. If you put restrictions on, it just means the rapist doesn't have to get dressed up. It's just stupid. There are plenty of threats to fairness and equality in women's sports, but those threats don't include trans women. While the IOC first created a policy to include trans women in the world's most elite competition nearly 2 decades ago. Oh, 2 decades ago. So they did it 2 decades ago. That's more than 2004. That's like 2 decades. That's 20 years ago. And people are only kicking up about it now. Legislators in the State House, it's just madness. Again, it's just people causing shit. Arseholes starting shit. Excuse French, but it's just people being arseholes. Legislators in the State House across the United States are currently waging a fight to bar trans girls of all ages from participating in recreational sports. Since January, over 30 US states have either discussed or formally introduced legislation that would prohibit or limit transgender children from playing sports. Many bills are prompted under a false narrative of wanting to protect or save women's sports. It's funny. These men who want to save women's sports are being unfair to women that they're trying to save. Interesting, that. These bills often cite fairness as the reason to exclude trans women from women's teams. Some even include the word in the title, like Idaho's Fairness in Women's Sports Act. The Women's Sports Foundation has condemned this legislation, imploring the legislators to stop using girls and women's sports as a vehicle to discriminate. Boom! The women don't... See, that's what I mean. Women in sports don't want you to use their rights as an excuse to be bigots, yeah? So stop, some of you are just, because as the media does influence you, some of you might go, oh, you might have accidentally jumped on that bandwagon. Stop believing in it. It's nonsense, right? You're insulting women by using that as an excuse to discriminate against trans people, right? This is what makes it off. Most feminists, most women across this planet, God, I love you women, are supporting trans women, supporting trans people, supporting their rights. It's funny that, don't you think? I mean, there's a small group called TERFs, but we won't go there. But it's funny that, isn't it? It says a lot about society, isn't it? People say it's not a male-led society. Well, it must be, because all the women are going, look, stop being a bunch of dicks. Trans women are cool. Get over it. Women, I love you. Guy gives men a bad name, doesn't it? It's like, seriously. You know what I mean? If there's people say that men and women are different. If we're not careful, it'll start looking at that way, but it will not for the reasons that we think. It'll be like, yeah, women are more compassionate, tolerant, and understanding. That's what it look like at this rate if we're not careful. I'm not saying women aren't, but you know what I mean? It's like, if you want to see it fair both ways, it's like, seriously? Not only is the attempt to bar transgender women a group that is disproportionately affected by discrimination, harassment, and deadly violence, often transphobic and dangerous, but it also undermines the very cause it purports to uphold. As Minnesota Lynx coach Cheryl Reeve recently wrote in an essay for Sports Illustrated, transgender exclusion pits women athletes against one another, reinforces the harmful notion that there is only one right way to be a woman, and distracts us from the real threats to women's sports. In the fight for fairness in women's sports, don't become distracted from the real threats: access, pay, investment, representation, sexual abuse, and doping, to name a few. Because to confront those issues is vital to make sure all athletes marginalised by gender, and not just cisgender women and not just cisgender white women, are at the table. Raven Saunders makes X on podium representing where the oppressed meet. That's it. There you go. So again, in sports in general, women are being treated like shit. I'm sorry to swear, but it's important to say. Women in general are treated like shit in sports. It has nothing to do with trans people. And the fact that trans people have been in sports for decades, yeah, it's just stupid. So this video as a whole is a feminist issue. It's not a defending trans issue. The only reason why the trans people got brought into this is because a bunch of arseholes was using that as an excuse to screw the women over. So, yeah. As this article says, there are more important issues that are going on in female sports. Is what we should be addressing, what we should be looking into. Not this nonsense about having trans people in it because they have an unfair advantage. Because they don't, it's bullshit. You only hear about the odd one story. The odd one race where a trans woman or a trans man wins a race. But there are loads in which they've lost. In other words, it's basically normal. Basically like the analogy I give. Some days you win, some days you lose in a race, don't you? In competition, depending on how hard you train, some days you win, some days you lose. Their patterns are pretty normal for someone of their age, and usually also of the same. Oddly enough, a transgender man, his performance record, his performance physically, is the same as someone either 2 years younger, or I can't remember which way it goes, either 2 years older or 2 years younger, of, say, a man. So if you're in your, say for example, I'll just give a rough example. Say for example, you're an athlete who's 40 years old and you've transitioned into. Sorry, hang on. If you're born a man and you're in your 40s, right, and you transition to a woman, your performance goes, and you hang at the one, because there's one trans woman who was monitoring their performance. They did a journal to show how it affects it, and actually did tests and stuff. And yeah, so she dropped down to about the equivalent of a woman's performance of who's in their late 30s. So yeah, so it's like, one side you gain bits. So if you're a trans man, you actually gain perks that a man has. And if you transition to a woman, you lose all your perks as a man, and you gain. Because it doesn't matter what because like in Men's Health, there's an article where there's a doctor explaining that bones and all that stuff to make a blindest bit of difference. Because if you've got something on the outside to back it up, you could have a fucking skeleton of a T-Rex. It wouldn't make a difference if the outside casing and the muscle and all that doesn't back it up. Bones alone don't do the work, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So yeah, you lose all that strength. Your muscles, because a lot of times, basically what's happening with, especially if you're transitioning to a woman, is all that muscle tissue is being redistributed to go into your hips, your ass, and your boobs. So yeah, I just thought I might do a quick video on this. It was one of the articles I had linked anyway on the trans sports one anyway. Getting hot now. But yeah, but it's more of a feminist issue, and the unfair treatment towards women than it is about allowing trans people into sport. So anyway, I hope you found this video informative, and yeah, see what I mean? It's like, it mentions trans, but again, because I said I didn't want to deal with drama, but I thought it was an interesting issue to address, because it's like points made about dope, unfair treatment, unfunding, all these like list of problems that they have within the female sports industry, which is causing the problem, not actually trans athletes. So anyway, if you like this video, you found it informative, hit like, and if you haven't already subscribed, then please do, and I'll love you forever. And also hit the bell notification so you don't miss out on any future uploads. And until next time, folks, take care and be well.